Well, the traditional education system was definitely different from the mainstream, where we locked people up in classrooms for long, extended periods of time. A lot of their education was hands-on learning as they were out, say traditionally when people were working with their parents or relatives out in the field. And much of it was built around songlines and so forth. You'd learn the song, you'd learn the rhythm of the song, and the learning would be more like osmosis learning in many cases, but definitely practical learning relating to the subject of the day. Not a lot of the learning that occurs now. I know as myself as a student sitting through school, you had to struggle to put together how did this apply to my everyday existence, what I was learning. There was no real crossover. So there could be elements of that, but I think that's problems with the whole education system. And it's one of the reasons why I think I've been able to appreciate how many Aboriginal people struggle to learn, because I struggled to learn in the mainstream education system myself. For instance, I didn't realise that English was not phonetic until well into high school. And things like that just blew me away, because my mind was thinking in terms of a logic connection. And I could never ever see the logic connection to what teachers were telling me. For instance, they'd tell me constantly to sound out the word. What they should have told me was to visualise the word and remember its visual shape, because the sounds in English don't make a lot of phonetical sense. So Yolngu coming from, for instance, from Yolngu, which is very phonetic, across to English is just a nightmare. So there's issues like that, but I don't think that's the main issue. Even their university level education was much like our universities. But again, the mainstream doesn't understand that. Sometimes the mainstream now demands that Aboriginal people attend the Western schooling system, and then they slur off at the traditional education system. For instance, if a young person is to go into ceremony for 6 months, they'd say, oh, you shouldn't be forced into ceremony, you shouldn't have to go into ceremony, that's terrible. Your culture's, very demanding and all that. Hello, let's wake up here, mainstream. Our kids are forced to go into ceremony for how many years? It's called school. And if you want to be a doctor, you're forced to go into ceremony and university for how many more years? Every system in the world, including the traditional education systems, demand that students first get invited in and stay inside that learning process for a number of months or years. And it's the same in traditional society. You would start in a learning process, and it wouldn't be based on date of manufacture, the date of your birth. It'd be based on your ability. So wherever your ability was at, you work from there on up. And that might mean that you also then get invited into higher levels of ceremonial English. Again, we call it just ceremonies. We don't call them Yolngu universities or Yolngu education systems. We just see them as ceremonies. And this is creating great debate at the moment along the coast right now, where Yolngu parents and grandparents are sometimes holding their kids back from southern education because they want them to experience the traditional education structure. And yet the very people in those colleges and across the country, high schools and so on, are saying, yeah, but hang on, they've got to come back to school. They can't be at ceremony, They don't see that the traditional ceremony is traditional education. They're at education, just as they would be if they were in some southern institution. So again, there's a lot of myths here and a lot of confusion around this. I don't think it's people's ability to learn is because they didn't have those sort of educational structures. They had them constantly. and people would learn all their life. Sometimes people will take their whole life to get to the top level in Aboriginal education. Sometimes people will get to that top level at ages of 24, 25, 26. Depends on how fast they wanted to learn. And I think that's where the methodology is very different. Good students in traditional learning systems could move through very quickly. They weren't held up by their date of birth. They could move ahead right above their age group. That's the only thing that's very different, I think.